Then are you for a complete ban on commercial activity in residential areas, or have you suggested an alternative plan?
Again, let me go back to 1995. 1995 CDP lists the number of or the kind of commercial activities that can take place in a residential area. There's a list. It's a beautiful list. Unfortunately, it didn't work because that list was not followed and all kinds of commercial activities came up. We also have to understand that Bangalore has grown, economic development has gone up, there is more spaces required, and there's an overall requirement for people not to have to travel 25 kilometers to go to their place of work or other areas. So no, I don't think we have ever come from a context that a residential zone, a residential area should not have commercial activities. It's the extent of it, that's number one. But more importantly than that, when you declare any zone, forget a residential area, for let's even look at MG Road, by saying that this area is commercialized, it means that there is a huge pull on infrastructure. So the fundamental, I wouldn't call it recommendation, but the fundamental way on governance and people have to look at it is that prior to an area becoming commercial, the required infrastructure has to be in place. So one of the fundamental suggestions we are making is, if you take traffic for instance, if you want to have a commercial area, then first have parking bays, parking areas, multi-storied parking, then it's fine. Then you can go into that area. In a residential area, definitely that the list of a kind of commercial activities that should happen there must be thought through and must be fairly restricted. You cannot have industries, huge kind of multiplexes right deep in the heart of a commercial area, it leads to a lot of problems. So there are alternate proposals, there are alternative suggestions founded on infrastructure being a prerequisite, number one, and two, on the kind of activities that one can have in a broad area of residential area.
When you talk about infrastructure, it should be there first before starting a commercial activity there. Again to Mr. Vijayan, has the court commented on this aspect? I think you made this also clear to the court.
We have made it to the court, and in the master plan, I think we have quoted, it's now 5 years old, the PIL. We have, for instance, stated that in, let's say, a particular area called Koromangala, the master plan itself says water is supplied only to 37%. And the rest of the water is relied on groundwater. Now, on top of that, after the master plan makes that statement, in the next paragraph it says we shall commercialize. So the master plan itself is a contradiction in terms. So for a PIL, it's an ideal document to fight because every page contradicts the other page. So for the lawyers, it's a field day. But at the heart of it, yes, I don't think the court has come to that aspect yet. It'll probably come to that aspect in the future hearings. And one of the things that the court has said is, what do we do with the existing infrastructure or commercial activities to be there? He has left that open. CJ has left that open, and that has to be a discussion based on it. The CJ was not able to make a judgment because the government hadn't responded. They had no objection. They hadn't filed objections. They had kept quiet, and therefore the CJ went in for a, let's call it a fairly hard, wide-reaching.
Mr. Rajendra, you want to add to this?
No, in fact, I fully agree with what Vijayan is saying. Without the infrastructure going and doing commercialization just doesn't make sense. And when we talk about large complexes, we are talking about IT, BPO kind of things in residential neighborhoods. I mean, what are we talking about here? The degradation of the quality of life of residents with a 24/7 activity. Is that what we want for the city? So fundamentally, there are issues here which have not been considered by the master plan while they've been looking at this mixed zone use. And I think it's a great order that the court has given in favor of the citizens.
Mr. Ravichandran, don't you think citizens too are to blame? They have been letting out their premises for commercial activities. They also bribe civic officials to suppress the fact that they have let out their premises for commercial purposes, also to avoid paying hefty property tax.
Right.
We are also to blame.
Most certainly. In fact, you mentioned this thing about misrepresentation of the property tax. I think under commercial use, the proportion of people paying property tax might be about 10 to 15% as commercial use, while all anecdotal data indicates that should be about 35 to 40%. So it gives you the magnitude of the problem. But here I think it's a failure of the enforcement system. Because if you have a system which says that you need to declare your premises correctly, you need to do what's required to make sure that people pay under those terms. But I'm not exonerating the citizen who gives it out for commercial, but under the old mixed zone use and the kind of usage that's allowed, they are well within their rights to give some of these properties out for commercial use because the master plan allowed it.
Mr. Vijayan, which are those areas in Bangalore that has been classified as residential and where no more commercialization will be allowed?
It's actually a very wide list. And it,
Can you just mention the key areas?
well, the key areas as mentioned in the order itself, I think Rajajinagar, Malleshwaram, Jayanagar, Koramangala. Just go through a list. RT Nagar, Vishweshapura, Vasant Nagar, Richmond Town, you know, and in fact, any place that anybody has an address and where they stay, except let's say the CBD area per se, is by and large a residential area. This order does
In fact,
affect
the entire Bangalore.
this order does affect Bangalore at large. It affects Bangalore at large, and therefore we are anxiously looking at how the government is going to respond to this order, because technically speaking, by now itself, the government should have acted, because if they don't act, it's now in contempt of court, because they have to issue specific directions, they have to issue specific notices to various government authorities. I'm not talking to the citizens itself, so they have to take action on this. So
See, the Chief Justice himself has come down heavily on the government. Government hopefully should act.
past experience has not been that. I'm sorry to use the word. I don't know whether it's incompetence or indifference. If you look at this master plan PIL as just one aspect of it, this is a case going on for 4 years, and the current impasse has been happening for 5 months, whereby we have asked the government, or the court has asked the government, to file objections. They did not file objections on count number 1, count number 2, count number 3. They were fined. They still not filed objections. When the order was passed 1 week ago, they still hadn't filed objections. So I have a funny feeling that this order, which is of all the said and done, is interim, will force the government to start thinking about it. And if the PIL forces the government to think about it, we have at least achieved a little bit over and above the fact that commercialization of residential areas, there is a ban on it right now.
Mr. Ravichandra, who is to blame? The bureaucracy or the political class?
It's difficult to pin blame, but I think the two of them, both of them as a group, definitely need to carry a fair share of the blame. I suspect there's another thing that's happening in government. You have this God's complex. Those in power, they feel they can lord it over the place. Vijayan mentioned that they never even bothered to come up and represent the case on the other side. How do you describe this? I mean, here are a bunch of citizens who are making a very reasoned, impassioned case, and the other thing doesn't even bother. So all I can really put it down to is what I call the God's complex. You just feel you know what needs to be done.
Can I make a comment there also?
Sure.
In the various interactions with government, not just on the master plan, there is another thing at work, which is saying that let the court decide for us, and therefore we'll follow what the court says, rather than exercising the power, the authority, the responsibility given to either the bureaucracy or the politician. They tend to wipe their hands off when there's a controversy and say, let the court decide. And therefore, the number of things that's before the court, which should not be before the court, which should be actually be solved elsewhere, is fine. So once a court decides, then it's fine. We have to go by the court order, and that's about it. So they don't really.
In fact, that's an interesting point. Even if you take the case of Delhi, the whole CNG shift came because of the Supreme Court, which means the administration of the day, both the political and the bureaucratic leadership, they abdicated their responsibility of what they need to do, and then finally implemented, saying that we can't help it, it's a court order.